Welcome to Choices Create Change podcast. My name is Bobby Mink, and I'm head coach of Choice Consulting and Management. And today we're exploring the fundamentals of great managers, practical insights and tools to help you be more productive and effective. That's as a manager, as a company owner, with working with coworkers, managing a family. It doesn't really matter. How can you be better at managing what's going on in your life and what's around you? So there's 8 areas we're going to talk about. The planning part of being a manager, being organized, staffing or people, directing and controlling, producing something, your systems, and then your thinking. And as you've heard us say here before on Choices Create Change podcast, as a manager, part of your job, even as a parent, is to create and maintain an environment where people or children or coworkers can effectively and efficiently get their job done, whatever they're supposed to do. It's the same thing in the family. Are we creating an environment where our kids can thrive? How are we managing the home? And part of that journey, once again, goes back to, Jim Collins says that we ask 50% more questions and statements, trying to make sure we understand what's going on in the environment as we are managing children or spouses or companies or coworkers or whatever it is we find ourselves managing. There's a couple of things that you're going to have to make sure you're on top of. How is your decision making? How are you doing at integrating all these diverse elements to work together? How do we coordinate our people resources and our material resources? Are we doing a good job with that? Forming a useful business, a useful department, a productive family out of disorganized resources, and then integrating of unrelated resources into the system. So how do we pull all this together to make things happen that are productive and impactful? In this transition, I know for me in my career, this is kind of the path that I was on. You started kind of as a frontline person. For me, started with tools in my hands and did that for years. And at some point I had an opportunity to take a step up and begin to manage a little bit of a process, right? So I went from a frontline doer team person to the opportunity to manage, just a little bit of business. And then as I did pretty well at that, I got an opportunity to manage a little bit more piece, a little bit bigger piece of the business. And then once again, I was a team manager of a business area. I might be a project manager over multiple locations or multiple business areas. I might be move from project manager to department head. I might go from department head to vice president, right? I might be vice president to CEO or COO or CFO or CCO or CIO, right? So there's a transition as we begin to progress in our career and our journey and learning more about not just doing, but managing. There's usually a huge career opportunity, regardless of the industry, if we apply what we learn and grow what we're doing. So let's talk about planning and clarity. Why do you need a plan? Well, how in the world are we going to know what we need to be doing or what the people on our team are going to be doing if we don't have a plan, right? How do we know what goals to achieve and what we need to be working on and when those things are due and how we're monitoring those things if we don't have some kind of plan and clarity? What kind of policies do we have in place as a family or as a department or as a company? What kind of policies do we have in place that tell us how we're going to work together and how we're going to do this thing together? What are our procedures? What is the way we want to do it as an organization? What are the things that we want to do as a family? We always go here. We always do this. We try to always make sure we do this. What are your procedures? What are the rules of how we play together? Right? There's got to be some core values, the mission of why we show up every day, the impact of each department or each area. We've got to make sure we understand we need a scope of work. What is it that we think we're supposed to be doing? And is that written? What is the scope of what we're trying to accomplish? Do we have a budget that goes with what we're in charge of or what we're supposed to be managing? And how are we doing with managing that budget versus actual and cost that are being impacted? What if some things were unforeseen and the budget's not going to be exactly right? So how are we managing that? How are you managing the schedule of your people asset, but also your operational assets. How are we managing the schedule of making sure people are in the right place at the right time? They have the right resources. They have what they need. They know how to use what they have. They know how long they have to do what they're doing. How do we manage the schedules of all this? And then how do we manage the quality of what we produce when we're done? What is the inspection process to make sure that we're verifying what we're doing meets what our goal was and what we're expecting? So how do we have those things in place as an organization? If not, begin a process of putting some of that in place. It will change your life, your family, your department, your results. Instead of fighting fires and running around like crazy people, we need some planning in this management that we're doing. How about organized? How organized are you? So the organization is structuring of resources, orchestrating to focus on objectives and accomplishing a plan. We got to be organized. As the manager, and this speaks as a parent as well, removing obstacles, making sure we dissipate the uncertainty, bring clarity, that we deal with confusion and make sure people get back on the right road. That's our job as the manager, right? Making sure that people can be in an environment where they can thrive, a consistent and reliable working environment. What happens is when there's confusion, there's a lack of passion and focus. There's a distraction where people are unsure. And when I'm unsure, we wait or we stop or we slow down and things begin to bottleneck. So we need to try to make sure we work out the consistent and reliable environment, that everything is being organized together to flow together to work as an orchestra, where the right parts at the right time in the right process with the right people are all happening. And that is my job as the manager. It is 100% my responsibility. Here's what I know. 80%, and I think it's even higher than that now, 80% plus of our issues in our organizations are not the people. It's the system and the process and the manager, right? And so that speaks right to the profitability, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction of what we're all doing. Family satisfaction. We've got to make sure that our kids and our people and our employees and our teammates have what they need. They have some clarity, and we run an organized department and we manage that well. So how do you manage the staffing and the human resources? It's going to take people. In fact, I would say people are your number one asset, right? It's going to take people to perform the work necessary to accomplish the plan. And for what I know around the country, been doing this for a long time and have been involved with a lot of different organizations at some high levels, is this part of this journey of managing is really a struggle. The human resources, the people side of what we do in most organizations is really a struggle. A lot of the companies that I work with are small to medium size, so there's not a lot of staff. There's not a lot of extra money. Nobody has any extra time. And so what happens is we live in a state of reaction often, especially as it relates to people. When somebody does struggle and ends up leaving or getting fired, the reaction to get somebody back as quick as possible, as opposed to getting the right person back, is really what seems to drive most organizations and most departments. So what is the process for trying to make sure that you're hiring the right people to begin with? How do you know when you're interviewing and talking with a person that might be a great fit for the team, right? What is the process you use to qualify them? Testing or a DISC evaluation or some questionnaire, or making sure we get 2 and 3 level references, putting them in multiple interview situations in your department or organization so different kinds of people get to meet them and interact with them. Well, all those things help us make the best decision. So where are you in your organization and what you're doing as a manager in that department area of hiring? The next place where we really struggle is when we do finally get somebody on the team, they go to work right away. Most places do a very poor job of having a process the first 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to slowly start to teach and train you your job, but also teach you about the software and teach you what your passwords are and teach you how to use the software and teach you the employee manual and teach you what it is to take a day off and teach you what it is to be reimbursed and tell to tell us what you need to do if you get pregnant, or you're going to have to be out sick, or just a ton of different kind of policies. And most of the time, if we have an employee manual, which is a whole other conversation, then we give them one and we say, sign the last page. Let's go over it real quickly. We move too quickly, and we're not intentional, right? The other thing is that training, it's days, sometimes just a few weeks, when they're fully engaged and responsible for something or a position that's been in place for years. So the coaching for us as managers, we've got to figure out a way to get AI, ChatGPT, one of these resources to help us to create some training to try to get our new staff acclimated, comfortable, a little bit confident that they're going to be able to do a good job. The other thing is always planning for staff. If we make this deal, if we continue to grow, if we get these new opportunities, what kind of staff are we going to need in 6 months or a year? We need to be planning for possible growth, right? Planning for staff proactively, not reactively. We're going to have to do a much better job of hiring well and being ready for the hire if we're talking about future staff needs as we grow. How do you make sure you're hiring qualified people? You know, the Traction EOS process says, GWC, do they get it? Do they get what job they're supposed to do? Do they understand it? Do they want the job? And do they have the ability to do the job? That's a filter that we should be using always. So also understanding who you're hiring and are they going to be a good fit? You would be amazed how many times I've talked to managers, vice presidents that have made some hiring and they didn't even call the references, right? And so make sure we are hiring qualified people that seem to be a good fit. Do they match our core values if we have core values? Do we invest in training? Do we have some kind of baby step onboarding process? And do we have a process where we can continue to develop them? Are there videos with our software that we use that they can watch on their own time to learn a little bit more? Are there things we're preparing for that next opportunity down the road? Staffing is a huge opportunity, and we as managers, I think, have a huge opportunity to grow here. As managers, we're also responsible for directing this whole thing, all these resources and all these people, which means you're going to be leading. So how are you doing with your leadership qualities? How are you doing with pouring into yourself as a manager and learning and equipping yourself to be better and better with managing what you're responsible for? How are you doing with asking questions? How are you doing with removing obstacles? How are you doing with working on environments? How are you doing with motivating? Now, I'm not saying motivating where you have to call somebody and get them up and tell them to get to work and you need to do your job. I'm talking about celebrating you crushed it. Man, if you want to take that class, that would be great. I'm so excited about this new opportunity that you've asked for, right? How do we motivate our team to focus on the results and the numbers and the responsibilities to get things done? How are you doing with the motivating? How are you doing with coordinating? Does everything seem to be working well together? And if not, why? Let's start to figure out if it's not so well coordinated, we need to figure out what's going on. And communication. How are you doing with your communication? You know, John Maxwell wrote a book called 360-Degree Leader. And so as a manager, you definitely have people that report to you or that might be working underneath you in the organization, but you also have some peers and other managers that might be at your level. You also have some bosses possibly above you. So how are you doing with your communicating? Communicating at all three levels. How are you doing about making sure people are aware of what they need to be doing and what's going on? How are you with asking questions to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on, right? Are you compelling the events around you to conform to the plan? That's your job as the manager. If we have struggles with supplies, if we have struggle with staff, if we have struggle with some materials that we're using or a process that we're using that's not creating the kind of results, your job is to figure out, how do I compel everybody in this team and everybody in this office and even other people in other departments to conform to the plan to get us where we need to go? How are you doing at enforcing the policies that we do have? Everybody on the team is watching. And so if we're inconsistent with Sure, don't forget to turn in the vacation slip and, oh, I forgot. Well, it's okay this time. Yeah, you can leave a little early, or it's all right that you came in late. Like, how are we doing with the enforcing the policies that we do have? Because the inconsistency creates chaos. It creates frustration. It creates people starting to get some wonky attitudes, right? So how are we doing with enforcing our procedures and our policies and our rules? As the manager, it is your job. And I know across the country, I hear it all the time. Like, the hardest voice to manage is yours. And what we notice is most people seem to hate conflict. And so when there needs to be a difficult conversation, not somebody losing their job or being fired, but when we need to have a difficult conversation, it seems that I'll do that next week. Or, I should have done it. I really should have done it. Well, how long's it been? Well, it's been 4 or 5 months, right? The situation has passed, and the time to teach and train and push for correct behavior has passed. So as the manager, how are you doing with enforcing the policies and procedures and the rules we do have in place? Here's another great one. Are you inspecting what you're expecting? Right? If you don't inspect what you expect, chances are you're not going to be getting the results that you need or that you're looking for. There's a book, Managed by Walking Around. It's a great book. So part of that would be making sure you're just randomly checking on your people, checking on your team, checking on your metrics, checking on the process, checking on the family, right? Just randomly inspecting what's going on, because number one, it reminds everybody that you're aware of what's going on, but also you get to see things in action. And for me, what I realize a lot of times when I'm inspecting and talking with some of the people on the team in their work environment, I start to hear things or see things, and I get to ask some questions. And a lot of times I got to make some changes and some improvement in our systems and processes by hanging out with some people right on the front line, right? So you need to inspect what you expect, and you need to have that process on your calendar. You need to have a process where once or twice a week, you're just walking in and talking with some staff and just looking at what's going on and looking at some results, right? And then the last thing is, what are you measuring? What kind of reports as a manager are you looking at every week, every 2 weeks, every month? What are the metrics you're following and tracking, and how are they doing? The EOS process, the book Traction, when we talk about scorecards, we're really talking about a 13-week cycle, at least. We're not really looking for the day that we crushed it or the day where we really screwed it up. We're looking for a trend over time. So if you're beginning to watch numbers and metrics and results, you need to be looking for those trends. But if you're not watching reports and you're not measuring, there's no way you're hitting at the level you need to, right? So your job as the manager to direct all of this chaos and all these resources, just like you would a symphony. All right, controlling. So measuring performance against the plan. We just talked about it. Looking at metrics, having a way to get metrics. And if you don't, figuring out who around you in the company or who on the internet or Mr. Google or an AI, somebody's got to figure out how to get the data that you need to know that to look at so that you know what's going on, so that you're measuring the performance against the plan we've put in place. Here's our goals for the week. Here's our goals for the month. Here's our goals for the quarter. Whatever results we're trying to get, we need to be tracking those. We need to be monitoring those. We need to be comparing, budget versus actual, for example, because as the manager, your job is to correct any of the variances. Whatever is missing, whatever is off track, your job as a manager is, how am I going to correct this? How am I going to get this stuff back in line? I'm comparing it to what we did last month. I'm comparing this month to what we did last year, and things are not lining up. I've got to start working on what's the issue is, and I've got to start controlling or trying to control what is happening so we can get back on track. So not only watching it, but then figuring out or getting some people to help me figure out what seems to be happening, and then start putting in place some of those corrections to get us back on track. So production, as a manager, you are responsible for getting results. So what is it that you are producing in the organization where you're at? What is the end goal and what are the results? And are we producing those results? And here's what I've noticed a few times. Sometimes what happens is we as managers get really proud and really excited about what we're doing. And we can become almost overbearing and a little protective and kind of put ourselves and what we're doing above maybe some other people on the team. But you got to understand, as it relates to a manager, company results are the most important thing. So how is the organization doing? And then how is my area contributing to the organization? And so it needs to be a lot less territorial and a lot less combative. The bottom line and the end goal should always be the organization. Bottom line should always be the family as a whole, right? So the results are most important, but it's across the whole organization. Because what happens if your area does great and everybody else does terrible and we go out of business? It doesn't matter how good my area went, right? So we got to make sure we've bought into the entire culture and the entire direction and goal of the organization. And how do we know what we wanted to achieve and what we did achieve? Once again, we just talked about it. We got to be measuring. We got to be tracking. We got to be reporting. And here's what I've learned lately. There's a book that I'm finishing reading called The Great Game of Business. And one of the things that he shares is early on in their organization, they started sharing the numbers with the whole team, 110 employees. We started sharing all of our numbers. It was amazing to watch the employee behavior as they understood and realized what was happening to the numbers. And when things weren't good, they joined in together to try to work together to try to start making things improve. So if you want your team to step it up, you probably need to show them some of these reports and show them some of these metrics and see if we can't get them engaged if you can make a big difference in the results that we're producing. But a lot of times they think those guys are making so much money. The company's making so much money. Everything is so amazing. They've got this movie running in their head that is way off base because we haven't invited them in and shared with them some of this data to let them know it's not as great as you think. Yeah, we might have made $1 million, but we made 3% net profit. So we $1 million, we made 30 grand, right? So we did $1 million worth of work to make $30,000. Some employees would be like, what are we doing? Let's get going. Let's do this better, right? So invite them in on some of your numbers. Your systems. Do you have good systems? Do you have good processes? If you're saying, well, Bobby, we kind of always done this way. We need to stop. Like if it's not producing the results that we need, erase the board. Shred up the policy. Let's start over. Let's do something different. What are your processes? Do you track your variances when things are not exactly right? Are we tracking when they're not right? And are we starting to investigate what's happening that is keeping us off point and not producing what we're supposed to be producing? Are you looking ahead far enough to anticipate things in your area that we need to be ready for? There's a lot of places where I'm coaching in home building, for example. You have some superintendents, the guys that are actually building the house, and they might be looking out a week. And so they're trying to schedule trades and everybody's too busy. So the house sits empty. It's the same thing with whatever you're managing. You need to be looking far enough down the road as a manager so that you're ready for what might happen. You've ordered enough, you've staffed up, you've put a special work day in or whatever it is, but you got to be looking ahead. You got to spend some time thinking as a manager about your business, tracking exceptions, be objective and not subjective, assign variance corrections, make sure we're being economical and we're on budget and we're watching our numbers and we're watching our profit levels and we're watching our cash flow. Make sure whatever you're doing is easy to understand. If we make it crazy complicated, it lasts after the first lesson, they do it. But after that, they forget because it's so difficult. So making sure we have a process that's easy to understand, and then we enforce and train that process. Okay. And if you find yourself in a manager's position, one of the things that we've realized is a lot of us were frontline people to begin with. A lot of us grew up doing. Right. And there is a transition, especially if you're new in this management thing. There is a transition from being a doer to a manager. Right. The doing is more about me, controlling me, managing me, and watching me. Right. The manager starts to force me to get things done through other people. So I've got to start to manage and direct. And some people struggle with that because there's some difficult conversations sometimes you have to have when you're considered the boss. Right? And sometimes it's a whole lot easier and a whole lot less drama if we just go do it. Like, I used to do that. I'm good at it. Let me just go do it. It won't take but a minute. The problem is you're not managing and you're not leading when you're doing. You have somebody on the team and that is their job. They need to be taught and equipped and trained and then held accountable for that. So you got to manage and direct and coordinate. Great managers spend time planning and coordinating. I was coaching 2 young leaders yesterday, and one of the challenges that they shared was they don't have time during the week to get focused. If they work in the office, there's too much distraction around their office. And one of the young leaders said, I just can't stay focused. And so we decided that you need to get out of the office for an hour or two once a week, and you need to turn everything off, and you need to focus, and you need to bring your reports, and you need to turn your phone off, and you need to look at your numbers, and you need to look at your cash flow, and all the things, your rocks for the quarter, the things we're working on. So great managers spend time planning and coordinating and thinking. John Maxwell says thinking is the hardest thing we do. So as a manager, your task list, your calendar, your time management should begin to look a little bit different. You are responsible for creating and maintaining the environments where all of these people on your team are supposed to be crushing it. So you better have some time where you can sit down and think and plan and get ready, as opposed to running around like a crazy person all day, putting out fires, right? You got to remove obstacles. You got to empower the team to own it, be accountable for it, make sure they're trained, but they also need to understand the results they're responsible for. You got to be influence these teams, the suppliers, the vendors, the office. And if you could figure out how to be encouraging in the middle of all that, you'll create an amazing environment. They say that money is number 5 or 6 on the chart of why people stay in a position, but who they work with or who they work for is up at number 1 or number 2. People love to be where people get noticed. When the manager comes in and says, you did a really good job on that project. Hey, I appreciate you staying late Friday. Hey, I'm sorry we had to ask you to do that. I appreciate you so much for stepping up. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by and picking that up for us. If you can also figure out, how do I start learning to be encouraging? Just catch people doing small things is life-changing, right? Communication and accountability. We got to make sure we have open communication lanes with the people on our teams, and that they continue to be held accountable for what they're responsible for. You can help them, but you really need to let the responsibility sit in that chair. You can give them some ideas, you can give them some coaching, but at the end of the day, they need to do their job. So make sure as a manager, we have really good communication. People are accountable for what they're supposed to do, right? And what's crazy is I've heard some people talk about, well, once you get to a manager, you don't do anything. Okay, so hang on, because great managers probably are doing less than they did when they were on the front line, had tools or pencils or computers in their hand, because now I'm responsible for a whole business unit or a whole area, and it may be 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 people, right? So there's a different skill set and a different thought process that comes when I'm managing at that level, because I'm responsible for all of it, not just one part of it. So I've talked to managers who feel bad because Bobby, I'm over here making phone calls and emails and I'm not really working on, and I'm like, look, reading a leadership book or a management book is work. That's part of your job making you better. So be careful to check that voice, because you might not have the same kind of task list and you might not be working the same number of hours deep into the night or whatever, but you got a lot more responsibility for the big picture, for the results, and for the people than you had before. So cut yourself some slack. The working, great managers do not do very much. The working should look different, but some of it is because it's carried different and you own it differently. Managing is different from doing. And your task list and your calendar should look different as you make that transition from doing to managing. Okay? So thank you so much for joining us at Choices Create Change podcast. My name is Bobby Mink. And if you like our podcast, then please subscribe or invite a friend to check us out. And you can find out more about Choice Consulting and our services at choiceconsultingman.com. So see you next time. Go crush it.